Nothing better than a 7 a.m. beer and an unbrushed mouth.
Quick trivia. Did you know that statistically speaking, about 32% of all traffic crash fatalities in the United States involve drunk drivers? Meaning most accidents happen because of sober people. Well, these are exactly the words you'd hear from someone like Peter.
Oh, lullaby, babe.
We call them alcoholics, grappling with the very real, very heavy grip of alcohol addiction, also known as alcoholism, which Family Guy's episode, Friends of Peter G, is all about. We jump into the episode with Peter and Brian at the Quahog Cinema for a nice, quiet movie night. But before the film even starts, Peter is already looking for a way to make the night more exciting.
Hey, Brian, you want a drink? You snuck in liquor?
Now, from my experience, people who sneak booze into a cinema either have a drinking problem or are against corporate greed because those prices are outrageous. And when you hear his next words,
Yeah, loosens me up so I can talk to the people around me.
it's clear that Peter belongs to the former group, as he pretty much owns up to being dependent on alcohol. Brian, who is usually the voice of reason, ends up taking Peter's offer,
All right, I'll get in on that.
which turns out to be a mistake. With alcohol now on the menu, things quickly spiral out of control. What should have been a quiet night at the movies turns into another night at the Drunken Clam.
Hey, I already seen this movie. Let's talk about other movies we've seen.
Like any alcoholic, Peter has failed to drink responsibly. And by responsibly, I mean putting down the bottle at the first signs of tipsiness. It isn't long before his drunken babble earns him a well-deserved shush.
Hey, shut up!
But instead of cooling it, Peter doubles down with,
Hey, I'm not the only one talking. That big guy up there on the screen's been talking through the whole movie.
a deflection that pretty much sums up his intoxication. And it is at this point that things take a whole new turn, as Peter and Brian turn their attention to the big screen.
Hey, jerk! Hey, you keep it down!
I don't think that he's listening.
Which, as you might imagine, doesn't end well. With both his balance and reasoning impaired, Peter ends up flat on his face.
I am zeroing. You asked for it.
Not once, but twice.
Hey, those guys are backwards now. Get away from her!
Leaving Joe no choice but to come in and arrest him.
We got a report of a disturbance. Oh, what the hell, Peter?
Heck, you know it's bad when your drinking buddy is dumbfounded by your actions. What we just witnessed from Peter is a textbook case of alcoholism. According to various sources like the Hanley Foundation, a typical alcoholic always has booze on their mind. They cannot go too long without alcohol, and they continue to drink despite the negative consequences. Peter sneaking booze into the cinema shows that not only is it on his mind, but he clearly can't go too long without a few sips, a confession he makes by himself. And when he begins to drink, it quickly morphs into overconsumption, showing he isn't in control when it comes to booze, and doesn't really care about the negative consequences. Like most alcoholics, Peter wakes up the next morning to face the music. But this time, it's not Lois chewing him out for last night's escapade. It's the town's judge.
Mr. Griffin and Mr. Griffin, this court finds you guilty of creating a public disturbance and destruction of private property.
Brian, now slightly more sober, tries to weasel out of it.
Your Honor, if you'll just let us explain.
Only it's too little too late. As the judge swiftly points out,
I've heard all the testimony I'm prepared to hear.
I mean, with the cinema full of witnesses, there isn't much left to explain. And so, Peter and Brian are left with no choice but to confront the consequences of their drunken behavior.
This court sentences you both to 30 days of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Honestly, that sounds like they got off easy. No community service, no fines, just a few AA meetings? Not bad, right? Well, as we'll see, it's not the walk in the park they're hoping for. Back home, Brian begins to lament their sentencing, because what screams "I haven't learned my lesson" more than complaining about a slap on the wrist? A point which Lois makes when she says,
You know, if you ask me, this is gonna be a good thing for both of you. There's a lesson you need to learn.
but unlike Peter, Brian isn't really an alcoholic. Yet. Or at least he doesn't think he is. And so he becomes defensive when he responds.
What are you talking about? What lesson? I don't need to go to AA. I'm a social drinker, not an alcoholic.
Here we see another nugget about alcoholism, particularly one in its early stages, the denial, which, according to a brilliantly named resource, is a clear symptom of a growing alcohol addiction. Now, according to experts, denial of alcohol addiction can come down to three things. First, the person might simply be ashamed of their problem, especially if they live in a community that frowns upon alcoholism. Second, they might not be ready to accept that they have a problem and need to change. This is common among stubborn individuals. You know, the type who has an extra thick skull that blocks out advice, much like our friend Brian. And third, they may not even recognize the signs of addiction in themselves. You could say this is Peter, as we see him throughout the episode not taking anything seriously. Now, before we resume our story, there's one more bit of drinking lore we need to cover, and that is Alcoholics Anonymous. According to their official website, Alcoholics Anonymous, or AA for short, describe themselves as a fellowship of people who come together to solve their drinking problems. Think of pretty much any Hollywood movie where the actor is a middle-aged divorcee with a drinking problem. That church-like help group and the whole 12-step program, that's Alcoholics Anonymous. Anyway, back to the story. Peter and Brian show up to their first AA meeting, and right away, it's clear this isn't going to be their cup of, well, beer.
So let's all say us a big hello to Peter and Brian.
Hello, Peter and Brian.
Yikes. It's like they walked into a retirement home mixer. With the drabby tone set for the evening, their hipster moderator quickly opens the floor for everyone to share their experiences with drunkenness, which results in a series of funny, yet tragic accounts, like our friend over here.
I was responsible for the death of an innocent 8-year-old girl.
Wait, an innocent 8-year-old girl? As opposed to what, a guilty one? Sir, please be serious. And speaking of seriousness, that's one thing Peter is completely lacking.
What kind?
What?
What kind of car? You said you had a sports car. That's cool, but what kind?
It pretty much proceeds to make what can only be described as a classic Peter Griffin argument.
It was a Miata.
Oh, come on. That's not a sports car. How does that even kill a kid? What'd you hit her over the head with it?
Showing once again that he's not taking this problem seriously, which isn't surprising, as it mirrors the behavior of real-life alcoholics. Compared to other forms of substance abuse, alcohol addiction tends to be downplayed and even looked at as something quirky. Hence, you have the term functional alcoholic, meaning someone who's dependent on alcohol, but is still able to go about their normal daily life. Notice the word choice there. That is how a functional alcoholic would describe themselves. Not as someone addicted to alcohol, but as someone dependent, like there's somehow a difference between the two. You even have the so-called high-functioning alcoholics, who according to addictions.com, project an image of stability, seemingly unaffected by their struggles with alcohol. They excel at work, manage families, and project an aura of control. Emphasis on project, because in reality, they're still battling with alcohol. And when you realize just how deadly alcohol is, having killed more people than all other drugs combined, it doesn't even matter if they manage to function well with alcohol. They're still slowly killing themselves. After Peter gleefully shares some of his own drunken experiences, the moderator kindly advises him,
You need to relinquish your dependence and give yourself over to a higher power.
Now you see why I keep calling him a hipster. By the way, this give yourself over to a higher power bit isn't just a Family Guy gag. Alcoholics Anonymous, after all, was founded by a Christian revivalist group. Yup, that explains the church chairs. It also explains why Brian, our skeptical dog, isn't too keen on being there, a displeasure he doesn't hide.
You have a different view, Brian?
Oh, I don't know. Are we allowed to have a different view?
Sounds like something I told my Sunday school teacher when I was 14. And like a seasoned Sunday school teacher, our hipster had quite the response.
Brian, AA is the only way out for these people. Millions are saved every year by the program.
In his defense, he has a point. Millions have been helped by AA's 12-step program, with some research estimating it even saves healthcare around $10 billion every year. Yet even experts agree that AA might not be for everyone, a point Brian so brilliantly makes when he says,
People got along just fine for thousands of years without AA, just like they got along for thousands of years without religion.
Now, before anyone gets too riled up, remember that Brian is a cartoon character. Still, his denial of his problem is clear for all to see, as he now chooses to attack the solution, rather than just owning up to his drinking problem, leading us to our next segment. So we've reached the next step in alcoholic progression, the point where denying your booze addiction becomes nearly impossible. So what's the next best thing after denial? You rationalize it. Peter and Brian hit this stage the morning after the disastrous AA session. They're back to lamenting their ordeal, with Peter grumbling,
Lois, you weren't there. It was awful. Just a bunch of losers telling boring stories.
I mean, I kinda see where he's coming from, but the point of AA is to deal with alcoholism, not to have a fun night out. A point Lois makes when she says,
Brian, AA's been around for years. It's helped a lot of people get over their addiction.
Brian, on the other hand, wasn't having any of it. As he retorts,
Oh, it hasn't. They've just traded one addiction for another. Their life goes from being all about drinking to being all about AA.
and to top it off,
Only difference is when it's all about drinking, they're more fun.
again, fair enough, but not every fun you think of is a good one. As the saying goes, an idle mind is a devil's workshop. And in many cases, our proverbial devil prefers to open up a pub, making boredom the sneakiest trigger for alcoholics. One minute it's a peaceful night, and the next, it's a boring night. One look at the counter and all of a sudden the rum spelt on that bottle looks like fun. With Lois out of the room, Peter and Brian resume their sulking, as Peter muses,
You know what sucks, Brian? We don't got a problem with our drinking. It's everybody else who's got a problem with our drinking.
a thought that can only be seconded by a fellow alcoholic, as Brian says,
That's it. The issue isn't that these people are alcoholics. They just have nowhere to drink without being judged.
Not quite, Brian. You have the Drunken Clam and every basement belonging to Peter, Joe, and Quagmire. Though, I'd advise against Quagmire's place for obvious reasons. Once again, Peter and Brian completely missed the whole point, which is the destructive trail that alcoholism leaves. And so, they do the equivalent of lighting a matchstick in a gas station. They roll into their next AA meeting with crates of alcohol.
Hey, anyone in the house addicted to alcohol?
Note to self, if you see an Irish man in your AA meeting, it might be best to find a new one. And unsurprisingly, their hipster moderator isn't pleased.
Mr. Griffin, alcohol is forbidden at our meetings.
But his message is quickly drowned out when Brian hits them all with his twisted logic.
You all stopped drinking because you were hurting your loved ones. But you can't hurt them if they don't know you're drunk.
A logic so flawed as it ignores the broader consequences of alcoholism, which includes self-harm and the endangerment of the public. In the end, Brian and Peter manage to sway everyone to their boozy side, as the group's resolve crumbles like the walls of Jericho.
I wants me that beer.
Ah, the sweet sound of cheer and laughter, mixed with the sobbing of their livers. The scene mirrors a common story. Alcoholics trying to get better, only to be tempted back into old habits. And the speed at which they all give in, even the moderator, shows just how powerful alcohol addiction is. With the liquor flowing and the boring chatter silenced, the party is now in full swing. But nothing kills a party faster than that one person who has the police on speed dial. So when Joe's radio crackles to life...
Attention patrol cars, we've got a noise complaint at the Quahog Community Center.
It seems like all the fun is about to come to an end.
Oh no, there's a policeman coming.
But this is Family Guy we're talking about. And if there's one thing this show nails, it's giving an Irishman genius-level cunning when it comes to booze.
All right, everybody, you know what to do. Alcoholics, transform!
You can't make this stuff up. In the blink of an eye, they convert their makeshift bar into an actual church. Yet another gag about AA's religious undertones, complete with Peter dressed as a Sunday preacher. What follows is possibly the most ridiculous yet catchy musical number to ever grace comedy TV. Don't believe me? See for yourself. Ah yes, Mr. Booze. Our proverbial devil with the pub that possesses people into becoming drunks. Somehow it seems everyone missed how Peter and Brian, and not Mr. Booze, are the reason they've fallen back into their old habits. Blaming the alcohol is yet another symptom of an alcoholic. Rather than owning up to their problems and seeking help, they try to shift the blame on an inanimate bottle of liquor, like some mischievous genie is hiding in there somewhere. And so the night ends, with Peter and Brian once again not learning their lesson. Brian and the others decide to continue the party elsewhere, leaving Peter to head home alone.
You okay to drive?
And Peter, being, well, Peter, replies,
Oh, yeah, I'll be fine. I'll crank the heat, roll up the windows, and blast the lullaby channel. I'll be fine.
Oh boy. From that last clip and the title of this segment, you can already guess where Peter's drive home is headed. Straight into the nearest tree. And so ends the life of Peter Griffin. As the saying goes, you mess around and you find out. You play foolish games and you win foolish prizes. I can go on for a minute with the sayings, but I'll leave the wise words to our good old friend Death.
Hey, fatty, wake up.
Turns out, not even Death wants to haul Peter's huge mass. But rather than marching him straight to the afterlife, Mr. Grim Reaper himself throws Peter a lifeline.
Look, I've been told I can give you another chance, but there's some things we have to do first.
And so begins Peter's very own Ghost of Christmas journey, Booze Edition.
Peter, I'm going to show you where your life is headed if you keep drinking as much as you do.
Peter and Death travel to an alternate future, and the first place they visit is the Griffin household, which looks pretty normal at first, until future Peter strolls in.
All right, family, line up for cigar burns.
So future Peter is an abusive deadbeat who looks and smells like shit. And it gets even worse when Peter is taken to his workplace, where he sees, well, see for yourself.
What's this? This is the bathroom at my work.
That's right. And there you are in the stall with your boss, Angela.
What?
Honestly, I'm just surprised he even has a job, or that anyone is ready to touch him with a 10-foot pole. In any case, this turns out to be the breaking point for Peter, who soon realizes just how bad things can get when a person drinks too much.
Oh my God, I wouldn't have sex with Angela. She's disgusting.
And so, he promises never to touch alcohol again. This reminds me of when I ate a whole bunch of hot wings and I was sat on the toilet swearing off wings for life. In reality, that was just a moment talking, as 2 weeks later I was back at my favorite spot for another bucket. And as this article rightly points out, we really need to ditch the whole "I'm never doing XYZ again" when we're faced with danger or disaster. Not to say you shouldn't try to change your ways. In many cases, you absolutely should not do that thing ever again. However, such absolute statements are often as fleeting as a TikTok trend. Before long, you revert back to your old habits. Why? Because you never really learned your lesson. You were simply scared in the moment, and once the fear fades, there's something holding you back. I'm sure if Peter went straight back after this, he'd avoid the drunken clam like the plague. But give it a few weeks and he, Joe, and Quagmire would be stacking up bottles like bowling pins. Death knows this too, so he makes sure Peter gets the full picture.
Never touched a drop, huh? Well, guess what? I'm gonna show you that too.
Once again, they start their tour of the Griffin household. Only this time, instead of handing out cigar burns, we have Peter offering up Triple H's. No, not that Triple H, this one.
Hey, gang. Everybody line up for a Triple H, a hug, a handshake, or a high five. Your call.
Yup, alcohol-free Peter is as square as a nerd with a slide ruler in geometry class.
You weird.
So Peter rightly asks,
Who the is this jerk?
To which Death replies,
It's you, Peter. Alcohol-free.
Before taking him to another place, this time the Drunken Clam, where Peter spots Joe and Quagmire.
Hey, look, there's Joe and Quagmire. Hey, let's have a drink with him.
There's a tiny problem, as Death explains.
You've never touched a drop, Peter. You don't even know those guys. Those are your friends over there.
And so we see a side of Peter none of us ever imagined.
Hey, do you guys mind keeping it down? We're trying to have a conversation here.
All while surrounded by glasses of water with straws. Jeez, this guy puts a square in SquarePants. It's at this point that Peter realizes just how boring life without booze could be.
This is even worse than the other one.
Subjective, but at least he finally sees the problem in his thinking. Because as he puts it,
if I'm a drunk, I'm a jerk, and if I'm sober, I'm a douche.
And it's here that Death finally drops the golden nugget he's been holding on to all this time. That it all comes down to one thing only.
It's called moderation. You don't have to give up the booze cold turkey. You just have to be responsible with.
Finally, someone said it. It took them, what, the whole damn episode? In any case, Death wraps up his speech as eloquently as a Nobel Peace Prize winner, before returning Peter to his own present time. Peter and Brian end up finishing their 30 days of sobriety, and so it's time to crack open some celebratory cans. Now, I know what you're thinking. And Lois is thinking the same.
Oh, for God's sake, Peter, didn't you learn anything from this?
But Peter, to his credit, did learn his lesson.
Yes, I did, Lois. These are going in the garbage. But these, I'm keeping for myself. Moderation, Lois.
Sort of, I guess. The episode ends with Peter coming to a very Peter-like resolution of throwing half of the beer he buys in the trash. Wasteful, I know. Which results in a group of drunken seagulls having an existential crisis. Pretty much the Family Guy package. So what can we take from all this? That sometimes life's toughest lessons come from unlikely sources, like the Grim Reaper? Maybe. But what Family Guy's friend of Peter G really shows us is how easy it is to fall into denial and excess when we don't face our issues head on. It paints a clear picture of how alcoholism, like many addictions, starts as something casual, something fun, and gradually takes over, until moderation feels impossible. The episode nudges us to consider that growth doesn't come from swinging between extremes. It comes from learning to find balance, to take responsibility for our actions, and to do better when we know better. And so, if even Peter of all people can take a step toward change, albeit at the cost of the environment, maybe we can too.